Welcome, chess endgame fans, to the second of two videos examining endings from the 2020 United States Championships. And due to the pandemic, this was held online at the rapid time control of 25 minutes plus 5-second increment. And the position on the board arose in the game between the eventual winner Wesley So and Alexandr Lenderman. And it does illustrate that if you want to win tournaments, you have to know how to play your endings. So it's the same coloured bishop ending, and material is level. Wesley So had the white pieces, and he does have some advantages in this position. So white has a better pawn structure because all of Lenderman's pawns are isolated, whereas two of white's pawns are connected. And in addition, all of Wesley So's pawns are on dark squares, and in consequence they can't be attacked by Lenderman's light squared bishop. Whereas currently one of Lenderman's pawns is on a4, and so that can be attacked. And if Wesley So can lure any of the other black pawns onto light squares, so if he can induce the moves c4 or f5, then he will increase the number of targets for his bishop. The other problem for black in this position is the possibility of Wesley So's king penetrating. So black has to keep an eye on the d5 and f5 squares because these are natural points of entry. And currently Wesley So's king is on e4, so it is more actively placed than the black king on d6. So for all these reasons, white has the better of it. But white is only slightly better. But notice though that black's fundamental problem, these isolated pawns, is what's called a static weakness. It's just not possible to rearrange things so that any of those pawns can support one another. So this is a long-term disadvantage that black is saddled with. It's not going to disappear unless black is able to trade off all of the pawns. So that's going to give Wesley So something to work with. And then finally note that the h8 square is a dark square, and it's the opposite colour to the light squared white bishop. And so if black is able to trade off all of the white pawns except the h4 pawn, if you can get rid of the pawns on b2, c3 and f4, if necessary by giving up his bishop, then the ending will be a draw. So that's something that black has going for him. Okay, so in this position it was Lenderman to play, and he must deal with the threat of king f5. He's got to do something about the f5 vulnerability. And in fact, there's only one move in the position that deals with this threat, and Lenderman played it, and that is the move bishop d7. Notice that it would have been a mistake to go king e6, because then white goes bishop a2 check, and that more or less forces the weakening move c4, because if the king gives way, then Wesley So's king penetrates to f5. So bishop d7 was the only move here. The game continued bishop a2, bishop c8, bishop f7 happened, and Lenderman went back with bishop d7. So what happens is that Wesley So maneuvers in order to try and get Lenderman to play either f5 or c4. At the moment there's only one weakness on a4, but if white can induce a second weakness, then the principle of two weaknesses will increase the prospects of winning. And the technique of the Zugzwang appears quite a lot in bishop endings, and as we'll see, Wesley So uses this in order to induce a weakening pawn move. So let's carry on with the game. The bishop came back to c4, Lenderman went king c6, So went bishop e2, and Lenderman went back again, king d6. There's nothing really black can do at the moment. He just has to guard d5 and f5 and adopt a waiting strategy. And now Wesley So played bishop d1. That's a good move, and it accomplishes his first goal. It induces the move f5. f5 isn't a move that black really wants to play, but he doesn't have any choice here. The bishop on d7 must protect a4 and must also guard the f5 square, so the bishop can't move in this position. Black's king can't go king c6 because white would then snap the a-pawn off, and it can't go king e6 either because the bishop just comes to g4 and gives check, and both those moves would be losing. So really, it's a case of making a pawn move. c4 would allow the move king d4, and h5 just loses a pawn. So by process of elimination, the only move that black has here is f5. So okay, the first goal is accomplished. White's king went back to king d3. Lenderman checked, bishop e5. And now Wesley So played king c2. Okay, now although the move f5 does generate a weakness, a target, the pluses are that it does guard the e4 and g4 squares. And it means that there are no natural points of entry for White's king on the king side or in the center. So we can see that. I mean, look, all of these squares are under some measure of black's control, so it's not possible for the king to pass through. So instead, Wesley So switches to this idea of trying to get his king to a3, and if his king can get to this square, then it will pressure a4. So that becomes White's next goal in this position. Okay, so Lenderman decided to play actively here. He could play the move king d5, trying to penetrate. White would not allow that. The king would go back again. So that was perfectly a viable way of playing the position, just to try and wait. But instead, Lenderman decided to try and play actively. He played the move bishop c4, and this threatens bishop b3 check, and also guards the a2 square. And you know, I think playing actively in endings is always to be encouraged, so this is probably a perfectly reasonable plan. Now Wesley So replied with a tricky move. He played the move king d2, and this is much better than king b1, trying to go around to a3, because here black could go bishop d3 check, and now king d5, king e4 becomes feasible because bishop f3 check can be blocked with bishop e4. So instead, Wesley So played this king d2 move. And the point is that there's a nasty little trap here. If black goes king d5, and then white has the move bishop c2, and it's a clever zugzwang. Notice that if white were to capture the pawn immediately, black can go king e4 with counterplay. But the move bishop c2 is a nice little intermezzo. It stops black's king going king e4, and black is forced to do something about the threat of bishop takes f5, and he has to go king e6. And now white just picks up the a-pawn for nothing. So a nasty little trap there. But instead, Lenderman found the only move in the position. He has to defend a4, and so he has to play bishop b5. The game continued king c1, trying to bring the king round to a3. Black went king d5, trying to penetrate. White said no chance, played bishop c2, guarding e4. And now Lenderman went back with bishop d7 to guard the f5 square. Simplest was probably just to defend this pawn with king e6 here. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that move. But instead black went bishop d7. And the issue with bishop d7 is that So is now able to bring his king round to a3, because the way is clear now. The bishop on d7 is not able to frustrate this plan. King c1 then happened. King b1 rather happened. Lenderman went king c4, So went king a2, king went to b5 to guard the a pawn. So went king a3, black went king a5. Alright, now the ending is still drawn, but So has achieved a few things. He's got Lenderman to play f5, and he's managed to bring his king round to a3 to pressure the a pawn. So this means that the black still has to be careful in this ending. White's maintaining possible chances of victory. He's not giving black an easy time. So we'll see what happened next. Essentially, some manoeuvring took place. So tried to induce the c4 move from black. Bishop d1 here. Black went bishop b5. Bishop went to the long diagonal, f3. Black just went back to d7. Bishop h5 happened. Bishop c6. Bishop e2. Lenderman then offered a trade of bishops, since if bishops are exchanged here, it's a drawn king and pawn ending. So he said no thank you, and went bishop f3, try and keep some winning chances alive. Bishop d7. So what's happening really is just White's probing a little bit. Bishop went to d5, to the centre of the board. King b5 happened. White went bishop f7. Black waited with king a5. Bishop came to c4. And again, White's just probing, just to see if he can get another weakness, another concession for black. But black defends very well. Just plays bishop c8, bishop e2, bishop d7, bishop d3, bishop e6, bishop e2, bishop d7, bishop f3, bishop e5, bishop came to d5 again, bishop d7. So again, not much is really happening, but the longer the game continues, the closer the players come to playing on increment. So I think that what's happening here is just a little bit of psychology on the part of Wesley So. Just wants to keep the game going and to move to the critical phase when Lenderman is really down to this 5-second increment and won't have therefore very much time to make some key decisions which are coming up. And it's just a good tactic to employ in these modern time controls where you have increment, because it's going to always increase the pressure on the defending side. It's much easier to play with increment if you have the initiative, or if you have some advantage, than it is if you're just playing for the draw and trying to hold the position. So the bishop went back to a2, bishop c8, bishop b1, bishop e6, and now bishop c2. And I guess this is the best formation that White can really go for in this position before he has to make a pawn move himself. And here Black just has one move to hold, but one move is always sufficient. You only need one move to hold any game. And the only move that retains the a pawn and guards f5 is this bishop d7. So this is White's fundamental problem. He cannot employ a Zugzwang tactic to try and induce a further concession on the part of Black, because Black's bishop has just got too much manoeuvring space for this to be a possibility. And so, having worked out that the optimum squares for the king is a3 and the optimum square for the bishop is c2, Wesley So then tries the only other idea in the position, and that is to play the move h5. And notice that he's arranged things, as I said, when Lenderman is essentially down to playing on increment. So now Black's presented with a decision. Should he allow an exchange of pawns, which is going to leave White with a passed f pawn, versus a passed h pawn, or should he risk playing the move c4 here? Now both options are playable, but perhaps for understandable reasons, Lenderman really did not want to put a third pawn on a light square. It would be quite difficult to work out whether or not there are Zugzwang tricks in the position that allow White's king to penetrate, or which would lead to a win of one of these pawns. So he selected the very practical option of allowing the exchange of pawns, and he went bishop e8 here. So took on f5, and Lenderman took in turn on h5. And now White went bishop h7. And this forces Black's king to abandon a4. And the reason for this is that Black just cannot afford to go bishop g4 here, because f5 is just too fast. So the king is just going to have to come over to stop the advance of the f pawn, to blockade on the dark squares. So king b6 was played here. f5 happened. Black's king again headed towards the queening square, king c7, so took on a4, and the black king came over to d6. And notice that White goes bishop g6 here, exploiting the f pawn, improving the position of the bishop. Black can't capture because White's pawn would just be too close to the queening square, so it has to go bishop g4. Apologies. Nope, he went bishop f3 here. That's the move that was played. White went f6. Black went f5. And now White went king b5, and this creates the threat of f7. So Black met that by a counter threat. He went h4 with the threat of h3. Notice how the bishop is much better on f3 than it would have been on g4, because it controls this long diagonal, and so it enhances the threat of h3, because that is the last white square that White can control. If White does not cut the h pawn off on h3, he won't be able to stop the pawn from queening. So that forces bishop f5. Renewing the threat of f7 and then taking on c5, leaving two connected pass pawns. And here Black played the move bishop g2. Now this is okay. This does not lose, but it was not the simplest way of defending the position. So probably a simple defense would have been to play the move bishop d5. And if White goes b4 here, then Black can just simplify and then just go king e5. He's going to win the f pawn. Bishop would give itself up for the b pawn, and that would be a clear draw. So after bishop d5, maybe a better try is c4, but the bishop can just drop back to f7, and it has this bishop e8 check against White's king. So again, this is sufficient to hold the game. And in fact, as well as bishop d5, Black could actually go bishop c6 check first if he wanted to. And this looks even better. White has to go king a5, and now Black just comes back with bishop d5. And here c4 isn't even possible. So the draw is even clearer in this line. So there are a couple of ways in which Lenderman could have made life a bit easier for himself. But instead he played this move bishop g2. Okay, so what was White's best move here? Well, after the game it was suggested that that b4 would have had good winning chances here. But this doesn't, in fact, appear to be the case at all. B4 does not win. The the idea is that after c takes b4, white can go c4 and push the c pawn. But we'll see what happens. We basically get a pawn race here. c5 check, king e5, f7, h2, and both sides queen. And black is holding this position. This is a draw. So kudos to Wesley So for not going for this b4 line. I mean, the suggestion that he missed a win is not right here. And instead, the move he opted was the best practical chance. He played f7. Black has to go king e7. White captured the c pawn. King takes c5, creating the threat of b4. And this is met with the counter threat h3, threatening to run the h pawn to the queening square. So white has to give up his bishop. Black played bishop takes bishop, of course. And now Wesley So pushed the c pawn, and Lenderman took on f7. So we're down to a bishop versus two connected pass pawn ending. And this ending is going to be drawn if black's king can combine with the bishop to stop the pawns. So black wants to get his king over to the queening squares, c8 and b8, and preferably mount an effective blockade with the king and the bishop against the advancing white pawns. So Wesley So reacted to this idea. He went king d6, which is the most testing move, trying to shoulder barge the black king. And Lenderman's king went to e8, trying to get over to the queening area. But Wesley So wasn't having it. The king went to c7 to cut that out. And in this position, Lenderman played the move bishop g2. Now, this move is still okay, but the long diagonal is not the critical diagonal in this position. It is the diagonal that gives this bishop the most number of squares. But the key diagonal in terms of stopping the pawns is actually the f1 a6 diagonal. So this is a somewhat cosmetic move. The bishop looks good on g2. But it's not a particularly relevant move. So again, it just makes life a little bit trickier for black. So sounder was just to play bishop f1 immediately. Now that attacks the c pawn, so it has to advance to c5. And now black opposes kings. And notice that the use of the opposition isn't just something that we find in pawn endings. We find it in other endings as well. White goes b3, and here black just waits. His king is well placed. His bishop is on the right diagonal, so he can afford to wait. To b4, we just maybe put the bishop back on f1, and it's up to white to make progress in this position. So he can try the move c6, but again black just waits. Gives the move to white, uses the fact that the kings are opposed, and white is basically forced to give ground, just as with other endings where the opposition is a feature. So after white plays king b8, now black can go king d6, and after c7, black can go bishop g4. And after king b7, notice that if b5 happens, black's going to go king c5. Well, there's a key move here. Black goes bishop f3 check. And after king b8, then black just goes back. And if white's king comes forward to b6, then black can go king d7, and then he can put his king on c8, and then the king and bishop will combine and blockade the king and the 2 pawns. Okay, so again, bishop f1 is the move that demonstrates an understanding of the position and positions the bishop on this critical diagonal, whereas bishop g2 as played is just more of a cosmetic move. It's not something that achieves a tangible aim in this ending. Okay, so played b4, and now Lenderman put his bishop on the right diagonal. He went bishop f1. That's correct, and in fact it's the only drawing move. White must go c5. And now in this position, finally, Lenderman, who was down to increment, made a fatal mistake. Now, as we saw, black can just wait in this position. You can go bishop e2, or you can go king e7. And white will be forced to try c6, and as soon as he does that, the variation that we just saw will kick in, and the game will be drawn. But instead, black played a fatal move. He played the move bishop b5, and on b5 the bishop is a target, and also its restricted range. It has a restricted range because it's now operating on the a4 e8 diagonal, which is a much shorter diagonal, and this leads to problems and a loss. So played c6, and here Lenderman played bishop a4. He can go back with bishop e2, but we're going to have the same outcome. So if black goes bishop e2, then white will play king b8, and after king e7, c7, then he can go bishop g4 or bishop a6, and we'll have the same denouement as in the game. So instead, Lenderman tried bishop a4. White went king b7, black went king e7, c7 happened, and now black has to go bishop d7 to stop the pawn. And the problem for black is that the king and pawn ending is a loss. So promoted, Lenderman has to take the queen, so took the bishop. And after king d6, there's a nice little king move, king b7, and that is unfortunately winning. Unfortunate that is for Lenderman. And the last moves of the game, because black can't go king c5, he has to go back with king d7, and so played b5. And in this position, Lenderman resigned because he cannot stop the pawn from queening. All right, so a victory for Wesley So on his way to winning the US Championships. Well, as ever, the position was chosen for its instructional value, and the Waldsman would like to give credit to Wesley So and to Alexandr Lenderman for the accuracy of their play in this ending, despite the fact that they had so little time to think. I mean, the accuracy of the moves was really astonishingly high. But the main takeaway from this ending is to be persistent, to persevere. Wesley So kept asking questions. He made the most of black's static weaknesses. He put his pieces on optimum squares. Used the clock and the increment to his advantage when forcing Lenderman to make that critical decision whether to go c4 or whether to trade the pawns. And eventually he got his reward and won the game. Thanks for watching.